should be live.
Fantastic. Welcome all to episode 42 of Index or Office Hours. Today is the 7th of December, and if you don't know me, I'm Chris from 𝗨𝗂𝗶𝗀𝗀, and I'll be hosting today. I've shared a link to today's agenda in the Office Hours chat, so you can follow along there. If anybody is new to Index or Office Hours, please feel free to participate. You can request to join the stage if you'd like to talk, or feel free to ask text questions in the Office Hours chat channel. Today we have some really exciting topics planned, quite an ambitious agenda to get through, so hopefully we do have time for everything. If not, we'll move the open discussion element to next week. But first, let's jump into our first regular segment, Repo Watch. You can find the links to each of the client's releases in the agenda notes. I'm going to kind of run through them, but please feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. So starting with major Ethereum clients, there was a release of 1.10.13 on Geth 13 days ago. So yeah, nothing much to add from last Index or Office Hours. Aragon saw a release 6 days ago, and this release is quite a big deal for the indexing community. It fixes a key outstanding issue, getting logs for the first block. And so this unblocks quite a number of subgraphs that didn't specify a start block from starting. So that's a big deal for anybody on Aragon. Please make sure to upgrade. There was an open Ethereum release about 6 hours ago, which fixes an overflow issue. So you might want to update there. But the big thing to say there is Open Ethereum, certainly as far as I can see, still has no support for the 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 fork. And that is scheduled for tomorrow, actually, is expected. It's expected to drop. I'll stick a link to the block countdown in the chat. Okay.
So
moving on.
What happens with Open Ethereum if we go over the block schedule for the hard fork?
The client should just stop working. You know,
Okay.
it won't fork with the rest of the network, and you'd likely be able to query it for, you know, data up until the point of the hard fork, but at that point it will lose sync.
All right.
The day has finally come. Is anybody still running OE?
I am on it.
What is your plan?
Switch overnight.
I just nuked one of the 3 Open Ethereum servers that were running yesterday. Actually, I'm starting syncing yet another Aragon instance.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, if anybody's still on OE. 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 is saying that OE is supporting 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 as of RC14. So that would be my bad then. OE lives on.
Damn it.
But switch to Aragon.
It will continue to live on, and while the ease of making the upgrades is just putting something in there for the hard fork, right? It's the point where things get more complicated and nobody's funding the development is where they'll say, well, oh, well, done, you know? And still, people will still be in this situation where they wonder why their node isn't working the next day.
Yes, and enraged at the developers.
It's all the developers' fault.
Okay.
Lucky for me, though, Chris, because my Aragon node died yesterday.
Oh, really?
I'm still using.
Any idea why?
Yeah, I compiled the new version, that version you've just described, and I've had some serious MDBX issues. There's a few people who... Huh?
Nothing. Keep going.
There's a few other people who've had the same issue, and there seems to be possibly a copy on write file system issue. Not entirely sure. There's another guy who's running XFS who had the same issue as me. And for once in my life, didn't take the snapshot I should have taken before the upgrade, so I'm trying to rebuild it from scratch right now.
It's on the 12.1 release.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, it's this is good info. Thanks for sharing. Personally, I'm on the 12.1 release, but on ext4 and didn't have any issues. Okay, one more thing that I want to add coverage for in each of our Indexer office hours is the Firehose instrumented geth from Streaming Fast. Again, the link is in the agenda. Most recently, there has been instrumented releases for the BSC 1.1.6 client and the Polygon 02.12 beta 3 client. I believe 02.12 beta 3 is the latest, but for BSC, there is 1.1.7 out. But I believe, Cohen, you said that, yeah, that contains a diff sync fix, which is irrelevant for the Firehose, so 1.1.6 probably suffices.
Yeah, I haven't checked the release note, but if it's purely about the diff sync is something asynchronous, so it's disabled inside of the Firehose version of the BSC client. So if that's all they did, that version is irrelevant for Firehose.
Yeah, I believe it was a diff sync fix. So yeah, those are, and of course, geth, and just regular Ethereum 1.10.13 has also been published in the Streaming Fast repo. If anybody hasn't started looking at Firehose, definitely do it. Firehose is going to be very important in the next few months. So building familiarity with it is a good idea, and I hope we can, follow that journey through Indexer office hours. Woohoo! Yeah.
I still think we need a workshop for those that like to work visually with stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy to do something like that early in the new year. Okay, otherwise, we have a 0.25.0 release from GraphNode, which we touched on briefly last week. I'm going to skip over that for now because we have some folks from Edge and Node to talk more about that and deep dive it a bit. We'll also be talking about Indexer Agent, so I'm going to skip over that. On Postgres, I see 14.1 is out. I don't know if anybody is playing with 14. At GraphOps, we're still running 13.
No, I've not touched it yet. It's been out for about a month now, I think.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anyone else talking about it. If there was someone I expect to be talking about it, it'd be Steak Machine.
No, not really.
Cool. Well, we'll keep track of Postgres releases in Indexer office hours. And yeah, if anybody can think of other really important components of the stack, let me know and we can try and review those through the sessions. Okay, before we move out of Repo Watch, anyone have anything to add? Okay. So next up, we're going to try a new regular segment, which will be called Protocol Watch. It's worth saying that some of what we're going to discuss or review in this segment has not been formalized or ratified in a GIP process, so none of these are guaranteed outcomes, but it's worth keeping an eye of the horizon for protocol changes. So a few things caught my eye. First was pull request 528 on the contracts repo. And that seems to introduce a signal threshold below which indexing rewards will not accrue on a subgraph deployment. Anyone have thoughts on that? And I don't know if we have any of the authors here who might be able to comment on the intention behind that.
How does that tie into what the Oracle does around assessing subgraphs? Is there a link here?
That seems like a reasonable link to draw.
So the idea is that below a certain signal, a subgraph would not be eligible for indexing rewards. Is that what you said?
That's what I can see in the PR.
I'm not super familiar with all the details, but I don't think some of the people who are on this call, so I'll just kind of say what I know. Ideally, we're solving every kind of problem, like economic attacks and so forth, at the protocol level. So this does serve kind of the same function as the Oracle does, in that it exists to mitigate economic attacks. However, the Oracle exists because there are some kinds of attacks that we can't mitigate using the protocol. So, for example, knowing whether or not the code for a subgraph is in fact available is not something that Ethereum can check for us, like whether or not you can retrieve files from IPFS. It's just not a capability that Ethereum has. So that would be like mitigating an attack through the Oracle, and this is mitigating an attack through the protocol.
Got it. Okay.
Thanks for sharing, Zach. Yeah, cool to see this stuff rolling out. Another one was PR 526 on the contracts repo. Shout out to Jonah, who recently joined the Edge and Node team and has been contributing on the contracts front. That's really exciting to see, and it's great that we have, a larger bus factor on the contract side. So PR 526, split signal for GNS named subgraph upgrades, which is something that we have spoken about before, but it's good to see that coming down the pipeline. Does anyone have thoughts?
Yeah, so this one's pretty cool. This is one of the kind of various solutions that at EduNode we've been working on for the issue of supporting N-1 subgraph deployment version. So for you indexers, this is being able to support the previous version and the current version. And we've had some solutions. I have a PR out in the indexer agent to do indexing rules by subgraph name. So the agent would automatically support the current and previous version and keep it allocated for you. But that's not an ideal solution because we really want to solve for the economics. So this PR is part of the solution at the contract level to split signal and allow developers, as they upgrade a new version, to split their signal across that new version and a previous version, so that you as indexers can be incentivized to hold both those versions and provide a smooth upgrade experience for developers.
So in practicality, can I just ask a specific on that?
Yeah, sure.
In practicality then, so you would be essentially allocating to a subgraph deployment ID rather than a IPFS hash. So does that mean that at the point when the new version of the subgraph is deployed, the agent would attempt to move allocation from the old hash to the new hash, or is there something a bit cleverer happening in the background? Is there on-chain work to be done there when that event occurs, the subgraph upgrade?
So as I mentioned, we kind of have this like staged solution where we're trying to get in quick solutions and then have longer term solutions. So the indexer agent upgrade that I mentioned allows you to define indexer rules by subgraph ID. Now this is kind of confusing, but there's a distinction here. Subgraph ID is at the GNS level, and subgraph deployment ID is, like you mentioned, like the IPFS hash that identifies a specific deployment or a subgraph version. So the change in the agent allows you to define a rule by subgraph ID. And this V0 of it still uses a single allocation amount. So the agent will just treat those two latest deployment IDs as separate rules almost, and it will just allocate whatever amount you have set to those. But I'm hoping to upgrade that as soon as possible to allow more control. So you can say, hey, I want to allocate this amount to the previous version and this amount to the current version. Now that's a fix in the indexer agent. And the fix that we were kind of talking about at the start of this conversation is at the contract level. so that the signal itself would be split. And then we could update the agent to look at that and then decide allocation amounts and have smarter decision bases around those signal levels, because the developer will be able to define the ratio of signal on the current versus previous allocations.
Interesting. Right. Okay. So it wouldn't, the situation isn't always going to be essentially we're upgrading and we're, migrating the entire signal across. It could be that both the underlying subgraphs retain varying levels of utility. So you want to keep some signal and therefore some indexing services on both.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the idea, is so that the developer and the curators can properly signal across those versions and stake how much they think the value of the previous version is.
So let me
The-
can I ask a question before I forget? So let's say a developer migrates like half of the signal, right? Can he do that? I think he can.
yes.
Then what happens when he chooses to migrate the rest of the signal? Considering that like the signal that is to be migrated might have gotten front run by other people with like new signals on the new version. I mean,
yeah, couldn't he just migrate 1% and then put in some GRT in the bonding curve and then migrate the rest and basically spike his own prices?
Yeah, there are a lot of little edge cases there. So if you look at this initial implementation in the contracts, it is actually just hard-coded to split 50-50. And we were talking about adding some more control, like I mentioned. So just to be clear, I was talking about more detailed control. Like this PR, it just allows a 50-50 split. And then once the developer decides that they no longer have need for the previous version, there is a finalized subgraph upgrade function that can be called that finalizes the upgrade and moves that 50% that is left on the previous version up to the latest version.
Would be nice.
Wouldn't this allow for front runners that wish to take advantage of that coming second half of the curation shares?
Yeah, I think that's like an open question that we're working on before getting this merged in. And I don't have like up-to-date information on the thinking there. I haven't been working on this personally.
Yeah, I'm not either, but from my understanding, Curation v2 would probably provide protections against that kind of thing. But I think that's definitely fair feedback and something that will need to be well considered before rolling out these changes. Again, Protocol Watch is I want to be careful that we all realize, it's good to know what's coming on the horizon, but nothing that we look at is necessarily locked in and will make it into the protocol in the form that we see it in today.
Yeah, I was thinking one way to avoid the signal front running with this implementation would be to disable the other bonding curve until like the whole signal is migrated over, which was basically, this is what I suggested like 2 or 3 months ago. Exactly this kind of approach. Partially migrate and then lock the first bonding curve so no one can get in, and then migrate the rest after like the new deployment gets enough indexers basically. But yeah, I guess we'll wait and see.
One question I have is with the indexer agent, so like that upgrade feature, I wonder what the syncing process is for the new subgraph. Like I'm imagining a failure scenario where like you update your allocation and then you start indexing, kind of like the normal indexer agent behavior that we have right now. And then like, oh, there's a bug in it, and like halfway through syncing, it dies. Like, is there a way to basically say, actually first, I would do this with off-chain subgraphs. Like I would first sync it up, make sure it like actually gets successfully sync to the head of the chain and then like open the allocation. So I'm wondering,
Yeah,
like,
that's
is that
that's a
possible?
great feature request, and that wouldn't be super hard to implement. Right now, the agent does have a small delay between deployment and allocation, so it'll deploy a deployment to its stack and then wait until the next reconcile loop, which is just a few minutes, so not too long, to allocate, and it gives a small amount of time for the subgraph to start syncing and make sure it's at least getting going. But to your point, it could be nice to have a flag on each rule that says, I want this deployment to be fully synced and confirmed to be healthy before I allocate to it. If it's not there already, that would be a great issue to add. And like I said, I don't think that's actually a huge amount of engineering work.
Yeah, I can maybe sync with you offline on like what should I make like a GitHub issue for it, because that actually could be a nice feature just in general to have on the indexer CLI, is just say like, hey, like open this allocation, but like wait, because I've definitely gotten caught out being like, oh, I didn't realize how long, like this is going to take me more than 28 days, or it just fails halfway through for maybe I forgot or for whatever reason.
And one thing that actually would I have in the pipeline that I'm excited about that I think would solve this and a bunch of kind of other confidence issues and issues with the way that indexers are using the agent is an actions queue, so that any allocation changes would not necessarily immediately take effect unless you decided on that strategy. But you could set like a strategy called oversight, and any allocation changes would go into a queue that you then confirm. So that would allow you to kind of have a different parallel actions going on, where you have the deployment syncing and then you have the allocations queue where you have like a allocation create queued up, but that doesn't actually take effect until you confirm it yourself.
What Nate was asking, I can see that from a technical standpoint, but not from an operational standpoint, because it would mean that whatever allocation amount that you want to put on it would need to remain free until that's synced. If the subgraph takes 1 day, leaving that unallocated, yeah, so be it. But if it takes 3 weeks, are you really going to leave your allocation amount open for it to sync that long?
Yeah, that's a good point with regards to like optimizing your efficiency of your stake.
I think there's another kind of key point to throw into the mix here, and I'll drop a link in the chat to this. But Brandon, Zach, and a few others have been discussing. I guess the topic has evolved, but requiring kind of first and foremost requiring that more recent POIs are provided on an allocation closure. But I think consensus is forming around the idea that a valid POI should be required to open an allocation in the first place. And so this change will obviously impact the allocation workflow and would make full off-chain sync a prerequisite to opening any kind of allocation. So I'll drop a link to that in the chat. If you have strong thoughts on this, please weigh in on the forum. But it looks like that's where things are going.
That would, force us to solve the problem in a different way. So yeah, that could be cool.
Okay, cool. Moving on. Next up, we have topics in focus. And the first one is the GraphNode 0.25.0 release. And it's great to have Zach and Ford here to dive into that a little bit more. So I don't know who will pick up this one, but if one of you could walk us through the kind of major outcomes of the release and some of the cool features that it brings to us.
I can start. One thing that, I won't get into too much detail because I think we've done a good job of covering this in the past, like as it's been on its way in, but there's a change that is going to be important and affect your indexer experience, which is around how POIs are created. And so the main thrust of this is to allow POIs to continue to be created ongoing and valid after a subgraph fails. So currently, when a subgraph fails and you want to close an allocation, you have to look at the arbitration charter and follow the rules, and then you look at the last valid POI for that subgraph and you submit a close with that. With the new version of the graph node, POIs will continue to be generated after a subgraph failure. And so you won't have to do any special case actions in order to close allocations on a failed subgraph, which will simplify your operations and simplify arbitration, I believe, as well. And also another benefit is that this will effectively make it so that failed subgraphs are attested to on chain, and we come to some consensus across the indexer network on when and how a subgraph failed.
That's a pretty important one, right, Ford? So just forgive me for not being completely attentive at the start there, but are you saying that if we're using version 0.25.0, say we have a open gamma mainnet open at the moment, and we're serving queries on it, we'll be able to now close that with the client, with the agent, because the graph node can now generate a POI for that failed subgraph.
Yep, exactly. And I would love it if you guys could, monitor this going forward and make sure this is working as expected. We've tested it, but as always, we love to have you guys testing and confirming across your various setups.
There's lots of us who are sitting on fatal error subgraphs, so there should be some good feedback coming from that for people who are paying attention.
Yeah, it's open coming up in the next few days.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Ford.
And there's a few other updates in there that I don't know if anyone else wants to talk to. I could talk to a little bit. Like some of them are more focused on subgraph developers. We have a new API version where there's a few additional fields that have been added so that subgraph developers can now access the base fee per gas on a transaction receipt and also the nonce field. And then there's a few things around deterministic contract call errors, which is something that has come up with the indexers in the past. And so I think some of you are aware of that fix. And then, of course, some movement towards multi-blockchain support with initial support for near subgraphs and some initial integrations of the Firehost block stream.
Yay for multi-blockchain. I think it's also worth mentioning that the 0.25.0 release will perform a database migration that drops the block cache. It's a simple truncation, so nobody should experience any issues, but that will happen. Does anyone have any questions about, I think the most important part, which is that change, maybe to very quickly recap, the arbitration charter today states that for a failed subgraph, the valid POI is the POI for the first block of the epoch in which the deployment failed. And obviously, Indexer Agent hasn't been capable of generating that today, so there's this manual workflow required for closing those allocations. And what we're saying is that is gone. And from now, once you upgrade to 25.0, Indexer Agent will just handle it for you. Is that clear?
Is it gone, though? It's in the arbitration charter.
I think that's actually an excellent question, Jim. It seems that the arbitration charter should recognize some, point at which it is no longer valid to submit old POIs effectively.
Agreed. There needs to be some kind of changeover window or something where people are okay to do one thing, and then at a certain point, it's canonical, and you leave the agent to do the work.
Yeah, and I suppose just to clarify a detail, with the 0.25.0 release, the POIs will actually change. So a POI will be generated for the latest block. Is that right, Zach? And so in that instance, there is an incompatibility in the charter, because it's not just that indexer agent is automating that, the POIs have actually changed, or the spec of what's valid has changed. Is that right?
Yep. It's exactly. Or go ahead.
The POI hasn't changed in the sense that there was not a valid POI post error before, and now there is a valid POI post error.
Perhaps I should say the definition of what a valid POI is has changed.
Yes, in a sense. Although the code for returning that POI has actually always been there, so it's semantics somewhat. But so my understanding of how it relates to the arbitration charter is that the arbitration charter has never been ratified by the council, and the reason is it was being held up on this issue, where we didn't want to ratify an intermediate charter that specified the rules that you have to use today, with the expectation of then we were going to change it very soon. Jim, you're on the council, but my expectation is that the arbitration charter will be ratified for the first time very soon, describing this new behavior.
Yeah, it was discussed briefly on the last council meeting. I don't know if it's in the notes, but it was definitely discussed that we're near the point where we can ratify it, and move away from this sort of gray area that we're in. So yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Cool, thank you. Next up is indexer agent. So I want to start just by acknowledging that, a few people have had troubles with 0.17.0, but it does remain the official release. And over the last week or so, we've had a few folks like Payne test in prod, and get bitten as a result, which, high risk, high reward. But yeah, I wanted to ask Ford a bit more about the 0.18 branch. We've obviously got 0.18.3 tagged, but it's not an official release yet. And so, yeah, what are the goodies that we can expect in a 0.18.x release? Maybe when can we expect it?
Yeah, so I was hoping to get that release out like beginning of last week, and then I saw some of these reports come in as people were testing it with some issues. So I've been working on debugging, like with Payne and with some other indexers, to make sure that release is ready for production for everyone. But basically, what I've been doing is tagging releases or tagging versions, so that they're available for your usage on testnet, and I'll try to get better about announcing those as testnet specific versions, and then I've been sharing those privately with some people to have a testing group, and then making sure they're working effectively before putting out an official release, which is ready for mainnet production stuff. And specifically with the 18 release, we're going to have a bunch of really nice updates. One major is type 2 transactions, which should improve the stability of some of the gas costing and the transaction management. We also have claim many, so we have batched claim transactions, so the agent can batch a bunch of claim transactions together in one, so that's going to increase the gas efficiency there pretty significantly. Thanks, Chris, for implementing that. And then a few like smaller updates. Those are the really big ones you guys should be looking out for. We also have a bunch of improvements to the indexer status API. So on the indexer CLI, you can call indexer status, and now you will be able to see your active allocations in addition to your deployments and the indexer rules. And there's some improved formatting there. I have a bunch of other stuff in the pipeline, but that's the stuff that's ready to go as we debug and make sure it's ready for production. We'll release that to you guys hopefully today or tomorrow, actually.
Awesome. That's really exciting. I know many are certainly excited just about type 2 transactions, but there are a lot of other goodies in there too. Does anyone have questions for Ford before we move on?
Hello. Hi.
Hey there.
Yeah. Hi. So myself, Vayan, I'm totally new to the graph protocol. Okay. So myself, I do have an experience of data analytics. Okay. For the past 12 years, I've been into data analytics, and I can able to derive some beautiful dash build. I have been built up with beautiful dashboards and project work with different kinds of project. Okay. So when I was searching for an infrastructure project which will be help for me in the career path as well. So with the data analytics stream, so I just got to know that the graph protocol is the one similar to like that. Okay. So I'm totally new to this, and this might be a new. I mean, this might be a basic question. So how, where, and how I can able to begin the graph protocol in the sense, and how much date it will be, how many days it will be taken to deep dive into a particular protocol and to digest the things and build a dashboard on the same. So is there any time or else something, how much it will be taking? Can anyone can explain on the same? It would be great for me.
How long is a piece of string?
Yes.
I would suggest that the best thing well, first of all, welcome to the community, and thank you for joining and speaking up and saying hello. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I would say the best place you could start is with one of our dev relations guys and the sort of output that he puts out. His name is 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗧. You can find him on Twitter. If somebody could link his Twitter on in the office hours chat, please. 𝗨𝘀𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗧 has done a series on how to use the graph. It's a video series. That's a really great place to start. It will answer some of your questions, and it will also answer some of the questions which are like, it's really dependent on the type of data you're trying to index, for example, how much time it's going to take you to index the data. That's where I would suggest, if you're a developer, is a really good place to start. And you can also reach out to, there's a subgraph development channel on Discord. That's a great place to meet other subgraph developers. And you'll see some of the blue names there from Edge and Node, and green names like 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗄𝗧, who's on this call today, who can answer some of your questions around the more technical elements of subgraph development.
That's great. Probably I will be following the office hours channel as well. Thanks for the information, Jim. Thanks for the help.
No problem. And again, welcome. Martin has put a bunch of links for you in, if you look above, is it above this channel? Yeah, above the stage in the office hours chat text channel, you'll find a load of really great links there.
And let me know you one thing. Actually, I am particularly interested in that near protocol is there, right? I've been the past month you guys have joined the hand with near protocol. So there are some opportunity areas. Okay, so I was planning to kickstart on that particular area. I mean, near protocol, there is some sort of projects is going on over there. So I am interested in these kind of activities. Okay, so let me go through that. Probably if any doubts, probably I can able to join once again this call and get the guidance from you. Thanks for the help. Okay.
Thanks for your question. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have Zach here to talk about the Rust Gateway, which was recently released onto the decentralized network. And for a few reasons we're going to find out, that's quite a big deal. So thanks for taking the time, Zach.
Thank you. So like Chris said, we've rewritten the gateway component, and it used to be implemented in JavaScript, but it's now implemented in Rust. This is not something that you would really expect us to.
Sorry, Zach. I was just going to ask, for anyone that doesn't have a clear picture, could you just give like a super brief TLDR on what the gateway is and what its responsibilities are in the network?
For sure. So the gateway right now is responsible for selecting indexers and making payments on behalf of DApp developers to indexers whenever a consumer makes a query. So what that means is that we don't need a lot of the necessary infrastructure that like if we're making payments in the browser, say, to indexers directly, which is something that we want to have eventually, but until we have that, we need something that's going to operate at scale and do payments on behalf of consumers and select indexers for consumers. So that's what the gateway is. It's expected to be a stopgap solution until we have much better Web3 technology support in the browser directly. Okay,
Thank you.
so that thing used to be in JavaScript and now it's in Rust. And you wouldn't necessarily like expect us to talk about this publicly because the rewrite is functionally identical, right? All of the APIs are the same, and there would be no need for indexers to make any changes. But there are some pretty cool outcomes that come from this rewrite that I want to share with you. So for some context, though, JavaScript does not make performance a priority. It doesn't do that at the language level, and it doesn't do that in its API design either. So what happens when you're implementing a large project like the gateway in JavaScript is that you're forced to make performance concessions at every single step along the way. And then at the end, when you go to production and measure, you find that not only is the performance not good enough, but worse, there's no clear way to optimize because the problem that you created is spread out all throughout the code, right? It's not in one small section that you can then profile and fix. To add insult to injury, JavaScript is also single-threaded. And these facts taken together make it impossible to achieve high throughput ceilings for servers and for like a complex server that's written in JavaScript running on modern hardware. And what we know from queuing theory is that once a server is nearing its throughput capacity, wait times increase significantly. So I have a graph showing that I'm going to share in the Indexer office hours chat, which I'm posting now. Okay, so that's there. You can see the graph of how wait times increase as a function of server load. What you can see is that on the left side of the graph, that when the server is not under load at all, that a request will take basically one request unit long to execute. But as soon as the load for that server compared to its total throughput capacity reaches, say, 50%, then the amount of time that the user has to wait for that request is now 2 units, right? And once you get to, say, 80% capacity, you're at 5, and it's going to approach infinity very quickly near the right end of the scale. And so one of the things that we know about infinite latency is that it's pretty bad for business. And we could see really early on that the JavaScript gateway was not going to scale to the level of traffic that would require to replace the traffic coming from the hosted service. A typical response to this problem is going to be horizontal scaling, right? You just want to throw a bunch of hardware at the problem and just spin up lots of servers. But besides all the additional monetary expense that would be required to spin up many servers, utilizing many processes has some significant drawbacks for our use case in the gateway. So one of those non-obvious drawbacks is that as you add more servers, indexer selection gets worse. And the reason for that is that each gateway process has its own local view of the world for indexer selection that it's updating over time as it's making requests and getting responses from indexers. Each one of those request responses is information that the gateway sees and can make decisions on. If those requests are split between many processes, it takes much longer for the collective gateways to respond to changes in their environment. So to give a simple example of that, let's say that an indexer has an outage. If the gateway sends a request to that indexer, it's going to fail. The gateway can then observe that single failed request, but it doesn't know if that indexer has an outage or if it's really just a fluke. What the gateway wouldn't necessarily several other gateway processes also observed failed requests span. But instead, those gateway processes are combined into a single process. That single process would have observed a series of failed requests in short succession and reacted to that information quickly and decisively. And so that's why we needed to write the Rust gateway. What that means is that we're able to provide a better quality of service for the same capacity at lower cost. Our data science team has been tracking the difference in quality of service both before and after deploying the Rust gateway, and the difference is pretty drastic. So I'd like to share showing another graph in office hours chat, and this graph is showing excuse me, the query success rate by subgraph. And so if you look at the left-hand side of the graph, that was before when we had a JavaScript gateway, and when we had to split that JavaScript gateway into many processes to be able to support the load that was on the network. And you can see that the success rate for queries is relatively low, like trailing as low as almost 80% success, which is pretty terrible when you want to have something like 4 nines, 5 nines, right? Then there's this spike down to 0, which is where we're not tracking data. This is, we kind of lost some information when we initially deployed the gateway. But then right after that, you can see that the success rate is near perfect, right? It's what you want to see from a network service. And so that's really all just coming from the improved amount of information that we can pipe into a single process by sharing that information that used to have to be like horizontally sharded. There's other benefits to the REST gateway as well. We can't really go into all of them due to time constraints, but just to list a few, the REST gateway is going to accelerate our development velocity by removing what we had before was a barrier between Rust code and JavaScript code that made maintenance pretty difficult. It reduces the number of bugs that we have in the gateway because we were running into several sort of weird JavaScript specific bugs. So it's gonna make sure that those kind of bugs don't make it to production. And in the long term, it's also gonna allow us to have better capital utilization for state channels. So we're pretty excited about it, and we want to give a shout out to Theo from Edge and Node, who has been hard at work making that happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That was really interesting, how performance, you really inherit performance problems in the lower layers of the stack, and you can't patch over that. So that was super interesting. Thanks, Zach. I guess as a couple of follow-up questions, how should indexers think about how this impacts them, if at all? And maybe on the other side, how does this impact consumers other than just offering a much better reliability of service?
So consumers their quality of service is going to be improved across the board. It means selecting indexers which are co-located near them, because we're looking at performance metrics, right? So even things like measuring the performance of an indexer are things which require sort of probing indexers for information and getting many responses over time and decaying that information as it is less recent. So having more information means better performance for indexers on that scale. Just every metric that you can think of that we are measuring was improved when moving to the REST gateway. For indexers, you should probably increase the quality of your service if you want to have more queries, because we're now making better decisions by selecting higher quality indexers more frequently. So just make sure that you have low latency and high uptime, and then you should be continuing to receive queries. Or if you already have those things, then you'll be receiving more queries today.
Makes sense. Well, you heard it here, folks. The gateways are watching you. Does anyone have questions for Zach?
when is it possible to see indexer service written in Rust?
As soon as anyone from the community does it, right? There's no gatekeeping that. So just go ahead and do it.
Wasn't there a
So there is no plan.
Indexer service in Rust.
I'm not aware of any plans right now. It's something that I would like to do, actually, to not really necessarily write all the indexer service in Rust, but at least part of it, and I forget what it's called right now, but there's a part that actually forwards queries to the attestation. There, I don't know the name because I wrote half of the thing. It doesn't matter. And so that we're effectively doing a lot of the work, right? By looking at the query and changing from UTF-16 to UTF-8 or the attestation forwarding into the graph node. I would like for that work to be merged straight into graph node, have node be able to attestation. Not only would that simplify infrastructure by removing a component, but it would be probable reduction in so I think that at least doing that part in Rust should have a high priority associated. The extra service, I don't know that you would get the bang for your buck that you want because it's not.
Yeah, it's not performance sensitive. Zach, your connection's breaking up a little bit. But what I got from that was it probably makes sense to migrate the attestation handling code directly into GraphNode. Did I catch that right?
Yeah, and then there's a service right now that we want to remove that and all of its responsibilities to GraphNode. But then the rest of the indexer agent that they make applications and or I don't see any clear benefit to rewriting that in Rust.
Yeah, so you're breaking up quite a bit. I don't wonder if it's something with your Discord voice settings, but I'll just repeat that here that the indexer service and the agent don't have the same complexity and high volume requirements that the gateway had, like not even close. So we wouldn't get the same immediate benefits as we did on the gateway by moving to Rust. I'm all for it still though, but it's not as obvious and high priority of a thing to do.
I would have another question about the gateway themselves. So as I'm in that from the view of an indexer, the gateway has always been this a mysterious black box, and we don't always know exactly how it takes decisions to route or send queries to specific indexer or not. I understand that we don't necessarily want to have everything super public because we want to maintain competition and everything. But I was wondering if there are plans to open it up a little, like publishing metrics, latency, I don't know, average query price or error rate, things like that that might help indexers identify where they're not competitive, or also when they're supposedly they're suffering an outage or something, and they're not able to see it. They're not able to understand why the gateways are not sending them traffic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
so go ahead.
Sorry. What I understood from the question was that indexers would like to see a reliable signal about how they compare in the network and why they may or may not be receiving queries. So just to put some context in that, if you have a product listed in Walmart, or just like in a retail store, you won't necessarily get data out about why consumers did or did not select you. So although I think that this would be great, it's definitely above and beyond what most people operating in markets ever see for their business. We are actively looking at ways to give consumers reliable signal about what's going on the network as a part of our initiative to remove the gateway entirely. So ultimately, where we want to be is that consumers can make these requests from the browser to indexers directly. To be able to do that, they need to know these kinds of things, like what the expectation of what their price, and sort of distributing that information in a trustless way. Very good.
Zach, you're breaking up a bit, and I think Ford might be right. I think it might be your voice settings. Might not be the level might not be low enough.
Yeah, or you need
I'm
to press
sorry.
and hold. You need to like press and hold down the button while you speak, whatever your voice button is.
I just have a mute button. I hold the button. It can't be right.
It depends if you're
Well,
on
I'm
voice
gonna-
activation or push to
Oh, you're
talk.
probably using voice. You can change your settings. So there's a key that you use to activate your voice so that it can just stay on more consistently and not have to listen to your voice level.
This topic, however, is so interesting, and we're only 1 minute left, Chris. So maybe if Zach's interested, we could talk about this another week. Because I mean, I'm definitely interested in related thoughts on this bit because we talk about it quite a lot in private.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good. Quality.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely think there's consensus that this kind of information, would really be valuable for market participants. But yeah, to Zach's point, we don't really want to treat the gateways as trusted oracles. So finding some other way to distribute these signals to participants in the network is a worthwhile endeavor. But I'm sure we'll pick up this topic again. Unfortunately, we've run out of time and won't be able to cover the open discussion topic in the agenda, so that will have to move on as well. But thank you all for joining us for IOH 42. Happy Tuesday, and see you next time. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks all.